Okay. So in the hints from my last video, I said this driver had a connection to birds. This was a bit misleading. If you see Willpower and get the reference, then fantastic. But if you still don't get it, one of the most popular gifts coming from IndyCar comes from the 2011 New Hampshire race, where an upset Will shows his displeasure to IndyCar officials by showing them his birds. So what we need to do is figure out how Will can be both one of the most excitable and relaxed guys in the series. And we don't need to visit this clip again.
Yes! Show me respect, motherfucker!
I just say that's another championship gone. That's basically what I said to myself. Man, I'm so disappointed for Verizon and all the guys.
So if you've seen enough interviews with Willpower, sometimes he seems like the most relaxed guy in existence, other times he's definitely not. I think this attitude can really be contributed to how and where he grew up. William Stephen Power was born on the 1st of March 1981. He grew up with 3 other brothers in the town of Toowoomba in Queensland, Australia. Toowoomba is known as the Garden City thanks to its volcanically rich soil. But Will says growing up here in the 80s and 90s, it was a very sports-oriented city and a very aggressive city.
Has Willpower ever boxed a kangaroo? Of course, that is just a standard thing that you do when you're growing up in Australia, especially in Toowoomba.
He says people judged you on if you could fight, people didn't want to hang out with you if you weren't known to be good in a brawl. And when speaking about his father, Will says he grew up in Toowoomba and he could fight. Will's father is Robert Bob Power, a man who grew up in Toowoomba and was born to a father who was a massive racing fan. And if you happen to be a fan of Australian F2 or F3 racing from the 80s or 90s, you may recognize the name Bob Power. Bob was a competitor who managed several podiums throughout his career, but was never able to secure a place on the top step. Bob had a chief mechanic and a man named Trevor Owen, but also did a lot of his own work. Seeing him work on his cars in the garage attracted the interest of his sons, Nicholas and William. When the racing came close enough to home so his family could come and watch, they became hooked on the idea of racing. Bob supported his sons' desires to race by buying them karts and taking them to the track.
14 and coming through the field, Bob Power on the inside there in the orange and white car. And Neil.
But he says he didn't actually want them to try it as a career. He himself says he was too smart to try and make a financial career out of racing and instead had several businesses around the Toowoomba area. He had a wholesale confectionery business and a canvas and sewing business known as NJ's Bob Power Canvas, established in 1971. His father had actually started a canvas shop in downtown post-war, and Bob had imagined his sons taking over the family business as well. In addition to racing, Will says his father influenced him in other ways. He says his father was very old-fashioned in some regards. As previously mentioned, his father was a good fighter. He still believed in using a belt to punish his children, and Will says they were generally afraid of him. Will says this influenced how he wants to be viewed as a dad to his children. Growing up, the words, "I love you," was not something he and his siblings heard much from their father. So Will wants to make sure his children hear it as frequently as possible from him. His parenting technique is more in line with the attitude of his mother. William's mother is Margaret Marge Power. Her first son was named Kenneth, second Nicholas, third William, and fourth was Damien. Marge named William after his great-grandfather, who ironically was obsessed with speed and set a motorcycle speed record from Toowoomba to Brisbane in 1915. In the early years, she was adamant that he be known as William. She is quoted as saying she thought the name Willpower sounded ridiculous. Marge is a much more peaceful person when compared to her husband. She comes from a family of teachers and trained as a nurse. On her first date with Bob, they attended the Toowoomba Demolition Derby, and that was her first introduction to automotive activities. She didn't think much of this, and even now she's learned more about proper racing, it still makes her feel uncomfortable and anxious. Prior to meeting Bob Power, Marge was actually a nun in a convent. In interviews, Will has said he doesn't really know how she met his father or why she left the nunnery, but believes it had to do with the mental stress and anxiety related to such a situation, a mental characteristic he and his mother share. Margaret supported the varied dreams and interests of her sons, but the first time she saw Will race in his entire career was at the 2014 IndyCar season finale in Fontana, California. Will's brothers are also interesting characters. Youngest brother Damien is a stand-up comedian who often likes to heckle other drivers on social media and has even done an IndyCar series of comical interviews with some of the other drivers. Will's older brother Nicholas was really close with Will growing up and even raced karts for a long time. When it came time to choose between racing or his other passion, Nick chose breakdancing, to the mild chagrin of his father, and went on to become a performer and now a choreographer. The oldest brother, Kenneth, became an accountant. In an interview, brother Damien was asked if this meant Ken was the only sane member of the Power family, and he responded with a definitely not. He says all Power family men have the insane gene. The time at which Will was born was a time where the family was not allowed into the hospital with a mother. The story goes that Bob and his father dropped Marge off at the hospital and then went on to a driver meeting while Will was being born. His mother recalls Will as being an extremely calm and peaceful baby, especially when compared to her two previous children. Even as Will got older, he was still really quiet and didn't talk much, the almost opposite of his brother Nick. Even with the age differences, Marge says the brothers got along well. Nick was full of energy and had no qualms with pushing Will around the yard in a toy car all day. As Will continued into school, only really English and art piqued the interest of the boy, and if he wasn't interested in something, he didn't care too much about his performance in it. His passion for art was so great that his mother took him for private lessons with her old art teacher, as art was sort of a trait passed down in her family. His mother has also said that all of her children are musical, and Will was very talented at playing the trumpet. Of course, nowadays, Will is known to enjoy playing the drums. Around age 12, Will started to become a bit of a rebel. He fell in with a crowd of his older brother Nick was into. While Will didn't break dance, he did skateboard, got his ears pierced, did graffiti, and says one of his favorite bands was Green Day. His parents thought the way to combat this was to send him to boarding school, which Will says pissed him off. One reason Will said this made him so upset was because he had to stop racing. He and his brother Nick had been karting since around age 7, and while they weren't taking it very seriously, Will was starting to get really good at his age group. At age 15, Will had a massive fight with his father about his rebellious ways and inability to improve in school, so his father decided for Will to come to work at one of his companies. First, Will worked at the confectionery place and really enjoyed driving the forklifts around vigorously.
Sadly, he was a two-wheel forklift driver and got into a lot of trouble.
You told me you were a great forklift driver. She was saying you're untrustworthy.
Hey, I could get that thing up on 2 wheels, remember? It's like bang, bang.
So his father transferred him to his canvas and sewing business instead. Will and his parents agreed he did this job well and enjoyed it. Will took pride in his work to create custom canvas covers for each project. His mother thinks this was because it was very artistic in nature. His father wanted him and his brother Nick to take over the business until Will started showing real racing talent. At age 16, Will started to race in a junior class of dirt cars, small tracks consisting of parts made of dirt and asphalt. Most people, Will included, drove a Datsun 1200 Coupe. The difference between Will's Datsun and the others was that they had unknowingly crushed the exhaust, taking the car off the trailer. His father was distressed watching Will run around the track so slowly, thinking he had a long way to go. They found out after that Will's debut was hampered by the engine being choked up and down on power. This year, Will would also drive in the Lakeside event of the Formula Ford Series. The next year, Bob Power would help support his son, and Will would drive several races in the 1998 Australian Formula Ford Championship in a 1992 Swift Cooper F. Again, in 1999, Will would compete in a couple of races in the series. Mid-pack results were decent considering the age of his car and size of his father's team against some of the other newer cars in the field. In the same year, Will would get a pair of silver medals in the Honda Indy 300 support races, finishing behind a Gary Rogers Valvoline-sponsored newer car in his 7-year-old Swift. His good efforts in his weaker car led to a deal between him and car owner Mike Borland, which would see Will driving a new Spectrum car. In 2000, Will would be driving his old Swift in the Queensland Formula Ford Championship, where he would get 5 wins, 12 podiums, and win the championship. He would also drive a newer Spectrum car in the National Australian Formula Ford Championship, getting 2 podiums and finishing 7th in the standings, 1 position behind Will Davison. This really begins the battle of the wills between the two drivers, as their career paths seem to intertwine often. 2001 would see Will swimming into a Sharky Van Diemen RF95. This year, he would see considerable success with 10 podiums, 5 wins, and finishing 2nd in the Australian Formula Ford Series, behind Will Davison. The next year would be busy, as Will would partner Mark Larkham in 2 races in the V8 Supercar Series, including the Bathurst 1000. He would finish 2nd in Australian Formula 3 with 10 podiums and 6 victories, and he would cap off the 2002 year as champion in the Holden Australians Driver Championship with 11 podiums and 7 wins in 12 races. The following year would see Will leaving Australia and taking a ride in the 2003 British Formula 3 Series. He would be driving a Ralt chassis car for the Diamond Racing team in a sea of Dallara and one Lola. Unfortunately, this would prove to be a poor choice as the team really struggled and Power would only compete in the first 2 rounds of the season. Power would rejoin the field in round 6, now driving a Dallara for Fortec Motorsports. This was still not considered a high-performing team, but Power would manage a 2nd place in the 2nd race at Thruxton. Around these same times, Will was really struggling financially to stay in motor racing. He was being supported by the Australia Motorsports Foundation, and moving into the 2004 year, he would race British F3 for Alan Docking Racing on a future investment program that he would have to pay back. The first half of the season would start well with 5 podiums in the first 11 races, but the second half of the season would be plagued with retirements and mid-pack finishes, seeing him end up 9th in the standings. Will would get the opportunity this year to test a Minardi F1 car, going straight from F3 to an F1 car. Even the Minardi, he says, was an amazing experience. He does say this test was soured a bit because at the test was also his countryman and rival, Will Davison. Before his F1 test, Will needed some more experience, so he attended a Misano test where other drivers were being evaluated to join the Draco team in Formula Renault 3.5 series. They didn't think much of Will, but he ended up being a 2nd faster than the other guys. Draco wanted to sign Will and thought he had money. Will told them he had none and his work visa was ending soon, so after his F1 test, his visa ended, he returned to Australia. Out of money, he returned to work in his father's canvas shop. After a few weeks, the Draco team contacted Will saying they had a contract for him and wanted him to drive for them if he could sign some sponsors. Will took the opportunity but was unable to sign any sponsors and started to piss off the team he couldn't pay. Will's girlfriend at the time worked for Mark Webber. Mark suggested Will get a ride with Carlin instead, and Mark would help support him for the first half of the season. The Carlin test went well, with Will being first of the testing drivers, but he was still locked into his Draco contract. It was $20,000 to buy his way out of the contract, but Trevor Carlin knew the owner of the Draco team and was able to work out a deal to get Will released to drive for Carlin. The 2005 inaugural season for the Formula Renault 3.5 series saw mixed results for Will, with 4 podiums and 2 victories, but ultimately finishing 7th in the points. He was unable to start the first 2 races of the year even after getting pole in the 2nd race. Then he missed the last 2 races of the year as well, as Will made the jump to join Team Australia with Walker Racing in the Champ Car series. A Gold Coast rich guy named Craig Gore got Will the opportunity to test the team's Champ Car during the 2005 season. It went well and they wanted him on their team. For Will, the goal was Formula 1, but he had to decide to pay another $1 million to race in Formula 2 or go race in the USA and be paid to race. Will chose Team Australia, and in his first full season of Champ Car in 2006, he would get a podium in the final race of the year at the Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez. William would continue with Team Australia in the Champ Car series in 2007. At the suggestion of Will, the team would try out and accept Simon Pagenaud into the team. While at this team, Will would also fall in love with his future wife when she became the receptionist at the team headquarters. Things were going well for Will, as he would also get 5 podiums and 2 wins on the year, finishing 4th in the standings in only his 2nd full year in the series. This would be his last year in the Champ Car series, as the series would combine with the Indy Racing League to form the IndyCar series. Will would be fortunate to continue his career in the KV Racing Technology team. In 2008, he would only get 1 podium, but it would be a dominant win at the Long Beach Grand Prix where he would lead 81 of 83 laps. Going into the 2009 season, Will was in the running between himself, Ryan Hunter-Reay, Justin Wilson, and even Romain Dumas to fill in for the court-bound Helio Castroneves part-time at Team Penske. Will would ultimately win the seat and would fill in for Helio in 6 rounds. During this time, he would get 1 win and 3 podiums. In the 14th round of the year at Sonoma Raceway, Power would be involved in a practice crash that would fracture 2 lumbar vertebrae in his back.
Full throttle up over the top of the hill, the yellow lights, the yellow flag was out, but he was already committed.
But in 2010, Power would return healthy and full-time with Team Penske. Since joining Penske in 2010, Will has gotten 36 wins, 1 being the 2018 Indy 500, 1 Indy Championship, and 4 championship runner-up. Not everything for Will has been roses since then. He's a proponent of mental health and trying to deal with stress in a healthier way. He says throughout his career for a long time, he had this feeling that other people looked at him and saw a small-town hick from Australia, and he would have to show them. When he gets worked up, he can lose his cool, which leads to incidents like the double birds at New Hampshire, which he did against his team strategist Tim Cindric's advice because he thought no one was looking. More than that, Power has struggled with some safety in IndyCar decision-making that has nearly led him to quit the sport a couple times. This concern is greatly fueled by his participation in the 2011 fatal crash of fellow racer Dan Wheldon. Will has said he and a few other drivers saw something that day that he can't talk about. Out of the drivers who saw what he did, the others have quit racing, and maybe one day after he quits, he can also talk about it. On a more positive note, in 2016, Will and wife Liz had their first child, a son named Beau, and Will wants to be sure he knows how much he loves him. With his Indy 500 win in 2018, Will said his career felt validated. He currently sits 5th on the all-time IndyCar wins list and 2nd on the all-time pole awards. He currently has a contract with Team Penske until the end of 2023 and says the goal is still championships.
Great prank would be to put a bunch of Vegemite in a Nutella bottle, get Joseph or Simon, taste this Nutella, it is phenomenal. It's a new brand, they've added a new ingredient. That would be good, wouldn't it?
Before moving on completely, if you like reading, then check out The Sheer Force of Willpower by David Malsher and Willpower, with foreword by Mark Webber, if you want to know more intimate details about Will's career and life. And as always, there's a whole array of podcast interviews, which are great. But for the next driver, we are going with someone once noted as the brightest rising star of open-wheel racing from the USA. An animal lover, the Cat Daddy, someone who has raced on 2 wheels, 4 wheels, open-wheeled, stock cars, dirt, and road, and a personal favorite. So like if you liked, and subscribe if you wanna, and I'll see you next time on Driver Profiles.